Okay, we're on the air. Good evening. How you all doing? Yeah, I need like 20 people to say something. All right, we're going to start a little series in Esther. It won't go very long, but we're going to get started and hope that we can pull something out tonight. There's going to be a lot of intro here, but bear with me as we kind of set the stage, because I think it's important to do that. And when you do a study like this, there's certain things you just can't bypass that are not in the text. And so we need to do that, I think, first of all. But, the obvious thing is who wrote Esther, and nobody knows. The assumption is Mordecai. You remember the guy named Mordecai? He would be her older cousin. Mordecai is sort of the stable, religious kind of leader in this story. Some say Ezra and Nehemiah wrote it, but that's impossible. Those two guys went to help build the temple in Jerusalem. They're not in the area during this event. So there is a divine author, the Holy Spirit. There was even questions about that. But we see this inspiring account in this text of events that, really that God wanted to record for us to reveal his sovereign power, his faithfulness, to deliver his people. That's sort of the overlying story here. There's a date, 465 BC. That is the last year that this king, Ahasuerus, was in power. So somewhere just after he was done reigning, or even that very year, it seems that this might have been written then. Ahasuerus, in the story here, this king that's his Hebrew name. His Greek name is Xerxes. Ahasuerus is the son of Darius. Remember the king Darius over Daniel? And then he's the grandson of Cyrus, the great King Cyrus. So he's got some pedigree to him. He's in the story, we'll see that what's not in the story that's missing is a huge campaign that Ahasuerus would go against the Greek nation. He loses a huge battle. That's not even in the story, but the timing is a part of the story. And we'll look at that for just a moment. He retires in this city called Shushan or Susa. There were 4 capitals in Persia. This is just one of those 4 capitals. So that's kind of just some background there. You can imagine if we just sort of go back in time, someone pulling you out of your house, putting you in handcuffs, then torching your home, sending you to a foreign country where you don't know the language, you don't know the laws or the customs. That's what happened to the Jewish people when Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem. We all know that story. The Chaldeans then later on were, not shortly after that, were conquered by the Persian Empire. So the whole story of Daniel is sort of wrapped up in that. And the Jews who were in captivity then had a new taskmaster, of course, another language to learn. Eventually, a new generation was born and raised during this time in various cities throughout the Persian Empire. And so all of this brings us to this story, and it's the story about the Jews, of course, we know that, who are facing life and death situation. Most of us know the story. Desperate circumstances are in this story, of course. And people wondering, I think, if God would or could deliver them is a big issue that we can see in the story. But in the story, there's this message that's loud and clear, which is that the Lord is sovereign, and we're going to be looking at that. He's going to help anybody who humbles themselves and calls on him. So in this story, God's people are going to be called to fast. I'm saying all this because there are so many critics to the book of Esther, a ton of critics. And some of the things that we're going to look at tonight just to help us understand the text. But, where is any spiritual decision-making taking place in this text? It's all about everything else. And so I just want to say there is a spiritual tone here. People are called to fast for their survival. It doesn't say that the Jews repented or that they prayed. There's nothing like that in the text. but we know if you're called to fast as God's people, there's an understanding that that means bowing humbly before the Lord, seeking him. Mordecai gets in sackcloth and ashes in chapter 4, verse 1. It doesn't say he called on God. It just says he yells. He yells. He's just caught up in the emotional moment, but there's nothing said about him calling on God. But he's in sackcloth and ashes, and he's mourning and concerned. So there's that. It's important to not... it's important to mention something that is not here, which makes this text, again, very concerning to a lot of people. There's a primary element that's missing in this text completely, and I've already alluded to it. Any mention of God. There's no mention of God. God's name is not mentioned. It's the only book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned. That makes it, has made it suspect for years whether it should be in the canon of Scripture. So that's a big issue. What is obvious, again, is this undercurrent that we see in the text of those who live by faith. The overarching sovereignty of God is here, watching over people and protecting them and so on. So that's all here. And along with God's name being absent, there's another issue here, which concerns moral and ethical issues. So a lot of critics are going to say Esther hiding the fact that she's a Jew so that she can be in this process of maybe being chosen to be a queen. That's an issue with a lot of Christians. A lot of people think that she's avoiding the issue, which is not honest. The fact that she's going to marry a Gentile, and if she's a true Jewish person, that would just be against the law. Why would you do that? The other thing is that Mordecai, her, I guess, spiritual cousin, is encouraged her to do this, which puts him in a bad light in terms of where is he at in terms of religious faithfulness. A Jew is he being faithful or he's not being faithful to the law? It's a big issue. So there are hurdles that you have to walk through when you study the book of Esther. You can't just take it as it is and say, there's the little story, isn't it cute? And isn't it wonderful that God delivers his people, without understanding the background that's going on here. So a lot of folks don't want this in the canon. There's actually, in the history of this book, there's a concern because when they found the scrolls and all the Old Testament scrolls in the cave in Qumran, the only scroll that was not with all the Old Testament scrolls was this book. So that makes it suspect. And the reasoning that some have come to in conclusion is that, and I'm going to talk about this later, is that we're talking about a crowd here. The Jews in this story chose to stay in Persia when God gave the clear directive through Cyrus, the king of Persia, that all of God's people can go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He made that declaration 1 year into his being king of Persia, which was after the 70th year of captivity. So the prophecies that they would be in captivity for 70 years, God's people, being disciplined by God, that after 70 years, here they are invited to go back, and a great number of Jews chose not to go back, which is a big deal. So there are some who believe that in that cave in Qumran, the Essenes, who are the very religious, very staunch guardians, if you will, of the parchments and the scrolls, that they had an attitude issue about the Jews who would not come back to Jerusalem to help build the temple in Jerusalem. The Jews that chose to stay in Persia. And so that this book, which comes out of that crowd that had stayed in Persia, may not have been respected by the Essenes as worthy of being in with the scrolls in the cave. Are you with me? So that may be why it was missing. They may have destroyed it. They may have read it and saw that God's name is not even in this book. These people were compromising their Judaism, the law. We're not going to put this book in with the parchments. And so it's missing. And so that's always been a big issue among a lot of theologians about whether it should be in the Bible. Then, of course, there are apocryphal additions to the book of Esther that have been added in later on. That even makes it more of an issue. So we have issues, and we have to work through them. And so I'm hoping we can do that as we look at this text. I believe it belongs here, but we have to walk through some of these things and be honest about it and not try to dodge the issue and say, okay, we understand there's some things that are here, but we got to look through this and see why we know this book should be here. First of all, I want to say that the characters in this book, so we're talking about Esther herself, Mordecai, especially these two main Jewish characters that we're going to see in the book, they're not perfect people. We know that. In fact, all through the Old Testament, here's one thing that becomes a testimony of why this book can be here, is because God always worked through imperfect and sometimes even disobedient people. I was just trying to make a list. I don't want to you can't make a complete list. It's crazy. But just think of Gideon, who followed God, but at the end of his life, he went out in the wrong way, full of pride and doing his own thing. And that wasn't, his ministry didn't end well. Samson, who was morally and ethically messed up, and God worked through him. David had tremendous faults, but God certainly worked through David. So God works through imperfect and sinful people, and that's a lesson that we're going to learn from this text. They're not perfect people. They've made some mistakes, and maybe even some of the things we read here are not complementary to who they should be. Maybe Esther should have said, I will not sleep with the king. I will not marry a Gentile. That's against my God and the law. That would have been extremely commending for her, and yet this story wouldn't have the ending it does if that took place. So we don't know exactly how to handle some of this stuff. But God works through all these imperfections in people's lives to accomplish his will. And I think that's one thing we're going to see. A verse you and I all know is 2 Timothy 3, 16 and 17. All scripture is given by inspiration of God. It's profitable for doctrine. It's profitable for correction, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So you have this book given to us as inspired and yet uniquely different. Everything that's found in the Bible is not to be emulated. Can I say that? Everything that we read about, and even, some very good people who may have said and done some things that weren't even good, are not something we're supposed to copy. But again, you come back and say, well, in Romans 8:28, which we all know, I took this out of the NIV, in all things God works for the good of those who love him. When you say that, we all have to agree that it doesn't mean that all things that happen are in themselves good things, right? We have to understand that. There's this commentary, and his name's Kyle. In his commentary, he says this: the book of Esther neither praises nor recommends any actions or any behavior, but simply relates what took place without blame or without approval. And so, when we just think about this book, we're talking about circumstances that are surrounding the people of God. These circumstances are unbelievable. And the amazing fact, which is going to be the issue, of God's sovereign work in spite of the character of his people. And I can stand here and say tonight that Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says that loud and clear. God demonstrated his own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So imperfect people can experience the blessing and grace of God even when they're not doing perfect things. And we just have to remind ourselves as we look through this text. So that kind of brings us a bit to chapter 1. That was a very brief intro, but to chapter 1 here. And I'm going to go through the story very quickly on this, just chapter 1 tonight, and pull some things out that we can use for our lives. But I just call this God preparing behind the scene. God's doing something behind the scene. So we read here, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Okay, right off the bat, again, There's a lot of folks who say this can't be in the canon because already verse 1 is wrong. And they're going to attack the issue of 127 provinces. There were only 27. And the word province is the problem. It's not provinces. The 127 is probably correct. And the word province may be correct, but not in the way we understand province, because it's the wrong word. It's the word is satrapies. There are these, what we would call a province is what this crowd would call a satrapy. And in that satrapy, which there were 27 of those, there could have easily been 127 of these breakdowns, which would be kind of like someone called them like communities or separate communities from one place to the next. So the 127 communities from India to Ethiopia that would have existed in these 27 satrapies. So that's actually how you can understand that. That's not a mistake. It's just that we don't understand what the word province meant in this text. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan or Susa, the citadel, then in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, it says 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days. I'm just going to throw in real quick this 180 days that we're talking about here is the king showing off everything that he has. He's showing off his wealth. He's showing off his power. He's showing off kind of like when a communist country marches, does a parade and shows all their weaponry and marches before the people before they have a big campaign. So he's going to do this attack on Greece in just a little bit. After this 180 days, and then he's going to have a party for 7 days after this. And we see when these days were completed, verse 5, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple and silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, white and black marble, and they served drinks in the golden vessels. Curiously, each vessel, it says, being different from one another. Can you imagine somebody having to make hundreds and hundreds of these things? With royal wine in abundance according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory. Isn't that great? That's nice. For so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti, here she comes, also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So she's in one chamber, he's in the other. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry, that just means he's drunk, probably. He's happy. With wine, he commanded, now you have 7 guys listed here. Mehuman, I'm not going to say them all, I don't need to. 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. To bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. Okay, so we have this amazing scene unfolding here, and the fact is that she's good looking. He wants to show her off. I wouldn't make it anything more than that. There's some places that want to build a big case about this, and it's not even important. So there she is. She's a beautiful woman. He wants to show her off. He's happy to do that. Verse 11, to bring the queen before the king wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty. Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. So we have this problem right off the bat, and I'm thinking that maybe she was in this meal she's having with all the women in the royal palace. I'm thinking she's maybe having a conference on women's rights. That's probably what she's doing. She's talking about being empowered, and while she's doing that, she gets this order from the drunk king in the next chamber. You will come over right now with your crown, And of course, if she goes over, if she's probably doing this conference, she's going to look like a fool. So she's going to stand her ground. I mean, I'm guessing that maybe that's how this unfolded. I don't know. But so it's a problem. So in verse 13, we read this, that then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. It's quite a little statement. So he's consulting with these 7 guys who are around him, wise men who understood the times. You recall one other time when we read something like this, it was in Daniel's account, where Daniel was actually joined or signed up with, pulled in to be a part of the wise men in Babylon. Daniel, because of his ability to give the explanation for dreams and so on, he was elevated higher than even the wise men of the land. He understood the times and seasons. He understood these things. And so that's an amazing compliment to him. But these guys have, in verse 14, it says these guys have access to the king's presence, and they rank the highest in the kingdom. So these guys are evidently the most intelligent, the most aware. These guys are the ones you go to for current news and to know what's going on around the world. They're supposed to be dialed in and ready to answer at any point in time what they know. That's kind of who they are. So verse 14, those closest to him being, and it gives the name of these 7 guys again, these 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. Verse 15, what shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And so there's this question that's been thrown out. It goes on and just gives us just this understanding. Look at, verse, I want to read verse 17. It says, for the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. So verse 18 says, thus there will be excessive and contempt and wrath. This is going to go so, they're just saying, this is going to be so bad, this is going to spread so far that, they're just going to despise their husbands. All the women are going to join together on this. There's going to be excessive contempt and wrath. It's just going to be ugly. And so they've painted this picture to the king about this, and it's a big deal. So we read here that verse 18, this very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen, thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath, and if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her the royal boot. Well, that's not what it says, but the royal position to another who is better than she. So she's being put out. So that's the advice here. Verse 19 is the first mention of the significance, if you will, of a king's decree. And this is a very important part of the story. Once it's recorded in the laws, whatever the king says, it cannot be altered. You recall this happened to Daniel, right? In Daniel chapter 6, when Daniel was praying every day, 3 times a day, and men who hated him knew that. So these advisors went to the king and said, make a decree that on a certain day at a certain time that the whole nation will worship you, bow down and worship. And the king made this stupid decree, right? And the king liked Daniel. So when these guys catch Daniel praying before his God, they bring Daniel before the king. And if you read the account, the king is grieved that he made the decree because he can't change it. So Daniel had to go in the lion's den. And of course, we know the story. But that's how powerful this decree is, and it cannot be changed. So this king was always quick to make decrees. I think it was a part of his pride, gave him his authority, and so he would make decrees left and right on things. And so that's the problem. He makes this decree, this proclamation. So it's a big deal here. So verse 20, that all wives then, as he makes this decree, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small, And bingo, that's kind of that decree. When you go to verse, look at verse 21. And the reply pleased the king, the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in his own script, to each province in their own language. We have a lot of languages here in Persia, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. Sounds like a great deal, doesn't it, for guys? You're masters in your own house. That little phrase there that says that and only speak in the language of his own people is an important little phrase because, in these cultures, a lot of men have married women who are from other cultures, from Jewish women to who else they've conquered. And if you recall, that's what got Solomon in trouble. Solomon married so many different women from different countries, different cultures. And Solomon, in his weakness, gave in to their foreign language, to their gods, their foreign gods, learning the language of how to worship their gods. He tells us in Ecclesiastes, he tried all of that, and he did that, and it was his demise. So here, there's this wisdom, even from pagans, who have enough understanding to say, don't give in to the authority of your wife, or that your wife may be beautiful, but if she's coming from another country, don't speak her language. Don't give in to that. Make her speak your language. That's what he's saying. They're not going to talk in her language, whatever that is. Your kids are not going to speak in that language. They're going to speak in your language. And just kind of giving the men this sort of like, look, stand up and be who you are, and don't let your home be changed. So even in a pagan culture, it is interesting that there is this strong thread of responsibility. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying there's a strong responsibility here to culturally not allow another culture to take you down. And I think that that's an important note for all of us to understand tonight. Okay, so this is kind of like, again, sort of setting the stage. We're not even into the story, really, just this stuff that's going on. But I want us to just consider tonight 3 things to apply that are important that will set the stage for the rest of the story. Number 1 is this. We need to remember tonight that God is sovereign. And when I say that, not just over the lives of believers, followers of Christ, but God is sovereign over the entire world and all the affairs of men. We've got to understand that. Let me just walk us through some principles. In Proverbs 19 and verse 21, we read this. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Psalm 146, way at the end, we're going to read, and I wanted to do verses 8 and 9, but I'm just going to read verse 9. Just the last part of verse 9 says this, but the way of the wicked he turns upside down. In Psalm 10, again, at verse 14, we have this statement, but you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief, to repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. It's just a reminder that God doesn't let anything go by. God sees everything. He sees enemies. He sees unsaved people. He sees lives. He sees the evil plans and thoughts that people can have. And not just in nations, but even in individuals and in homes. And he can see all of that, and he understands all that, and he's going to judge all that one day according to what he knows. And so we just need to look at this text and say, this is something that's going on behind the scenes. God is absolutely sovereign. So he's moving things around to do what he wants to do. Here's the second thing. Remember that God always watches over his people. That may sound like a trivial thing, but let me remind us in Psalm 121, I'm going to read the whole psalm here. It's not very long. Psalm 121, because it just says it loud and clear. Here's what it says. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, and he will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. You know, when you hear that, you just realize, even in this story, that God is watching. You know, while this is going on, while this story of Esther is going on and being played out, the other crowd that went back to Israel, that rebuilt the temple and is rebuilding the cities of Jerusalem, we all know that story if we read Nehemiah. It's a mess. They're under attack constantly. They're dealing with other forces and authorities who are opposing the actual edict by Cyrus. So they're trying to block them, and they're having to deal with all that, from paperwork to fighting off bad guys and enemies. So it's not smooth sailing, and they're under their own stresses. And so while that's all going on, here's God's people in a whole other place, who I still think could have gone back and been a part of that crowd, but chose not to for whatever reasons, and however God views that. God still loves them, and he's still watching over two places in the world where God's people are dealing with stuff that's life-threatening. God still knows what's going on in our lives, no matter what's going on somewhere else. He's still involved in your life, no matter what you think or how great the odds are stacked against us. God knows everything, and he cares about us, and he doesn't take his eye off of anyone. Isn't that amazing? And that's something, that's a truth that you have to sort of drive into your heart and say, I believe this because I know it's true. So God's watching. He's aware of what's going on. He's preparing. Listen, he's preparing for something that was coming. Now, we all know the story, but these folks don't. So he's preparing for something that was coming, something that without God's intervention would destroy all the Jewish people in this story. That's how serious this is, but they don't know that. Here's the third thing. Realize that God is at work all around us. All around us. He's stirring people for his unknown purposes, right? He's causing decisions that are going to lead someone to his desired cause, whatever that cause might be. So we do not know where we fit in his plan. Maybe even tomorrow, I don't know exactly how I'm going to fit into his plan, but I don't know how I'm going to fit. I don't know when I'm going to be asked to do something and step into his plan in some way. But I only know this: God calls us to be ready for when he calls us for what he wants us to do. That's the most simple answer to this whole story. Be ready. When we're going to look later on, but when Mordecai says to Esther, which is the famous line we all know, that maybe you were called for such a time as this. You know, when we all think about that phrase, there is a sense of readiness. And again, I can go back to and say, okay, I'm not sure about the character of this, how Esther's performing well or not, but that's not even the issue. The issue is that, people are going to go through events. God is watching. God cares. He's going to deliver them in the end. We all know that part of the story. But the best part of the story for you and I tonight is that we are called to be ready for his work, and he's working all around us, and we don't know it. I don't know what he's doing. Today, this morning actually, David came in my office. He's stressed out a bit. He was supposed to teach this tonight. I'm not even thinking about this book tonight. So I have other things I'm studying, getting ready for, and so he sits down, and as we start talking, I realize sitting there talking, you can't do this tonight. You got other things on your plate that are way more important than this. And you can't be distracted trying to study to deliver this sermon tonight on Wednesday night. You need to do what you got to do with the youth. So he was relieved. He didn't really ask to be taken off, but he was feeling guilty. I said, don't feel guilty. Do what you got to do. And I'll get something ready for tonight. So that's you don't know when you're going to have to step into something that you're not prepared for. It's a silly thing, but I mean, I suppose I'm supposed to always be ready to teach out of Esther. I'm not. But it's just one of those things. You got to be ready. You got to be ready in your heart, ready in your mind, because you don't know what you're going to be asked to do. And I've had a lot of surprises in the last 3 weeks. So that's just how it works. And so, I don't know, but I know in this readiness, I had to just remind myself, you all know the verse, Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. You all know this, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. He goes on, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So tonight, I can't see what's coming. Neither can you. And listening to my daughter crying on as she was showing with her phone, showing us their house that they just bought, and all the walls are dripping under the paint, and the wood is wet, and the floors are warping. And it's all from, as I told James, the 5 feet of snow that's on their roof of their house while they were gone. And they came home, and they had to get a big machine to come yesterday to try to get into their property and get the snow off. But there's over 6 feet high in their yard. It hasn't stopped snowing for ages. And even like at Dory's place, you were just there. So I'm guessing 4 or 5 feet probably on the sides of your road. And there's nowhere to go. There's cars parked everywhere if you're in the city, and it's just crazy. Out where they are, it's just a mess. So, here's my daughter just saying, you just don't know from one day to the next. You think you're okay, the next day, you got to rebuild your house. So you just don't know what's happening in our lives, and it's just a call to us again to be ready, be looking, be in a state of readiness for what God calls us to do in a moment when we need to be ready to serve him, to be a willing servant and ready to go. And you don't know what that means, and neither do I. But it can happen in a breath of air tomorrow, right? So if nothing else, take that from this text, and next week we'll get into some more details. Let me pray. Lord, your word is a reminder to us tonight again that things can change in a moment, things we're not expecting. What can be a mundane day can turn into an amazing moment, or it can turn into a major nightmare. And we have to just realize that as your people, we are not guaranteed a great day. We're guaranteed a great presence, and that's you. Lord, help us to reflect on that tonight and be thankful, be repentive in our heart, have a clear conscience as we stand with you. And Lord, may your grace be upon us for the days and moments that come in the future. We praise you for what's happening around the world today and what we see going on. We are thankful to be alive during this time. And Lord, help us to be whatever you call us to be in that moment. We give you praise and glory for that. Be with those who are watching and encourage them.